Hi there, my name is Kathleen Turner, and I'm the dietitian here in the Cardiac Rehab program at the Heart Institute. And I'm looking forward to chatting with you all virtually today about nutrition and heart failure. So we'll get started and dive in. So I think when it comes to heart failure, it's a big change in terms of the way that you've been eating. And it's important to remember that making changes to your diet or to the way that you're eating can be really hard. So if you've eaten one particular way for however many years, starting to make these changes can feel tough. So I just want to acknowledge that's the case and remind you that you can do this gradually over time. So you want to think about making these changes, making them stick, getting used to them, but it is hard and that's okay, but it is going to get better. You just have to stick with it. So let's talk about what some of those changes might look like. So for those of you who have heart failure, the big thing you want to be mindful of is your sodium intake. And in healthcare, we often use the term sodium and salt interchangeably, but they're not really the same thing. So the sodium is the bit that you folks need to be careful of because sodium can act like a sponge and make it harder for your heart to pump. So when you have too much sodium, sometimes that can make your heart failure symptoms worse. So you might find that your ankles get swollen or your hands get swollen or that you get more short of breath. So by having less sodium, that can help to minimize some of those symptoms. And when we talk about sodium, we mean sodium, not necessarily salt. So salt is made up of sodium and chloride, but the bit that's going to have the impact on your health is the sodium. But we find sodium in other places besides just salt. So in a day, you want to have not more than 2,500 milligrams of sodium. So that's kind of your target for the day. But to put that into perspective for you, a teaspoon of salt has 2,300 milligrams of sodium in it. So it really doesn't take long to reach that 2,500 milligrams. However, that being said, most of the sodium we eat comes from prepared and processed foods. So it's not the salt that you're adding at the table or in cooking, it's the salt that's already in things. So that's why you want to read food labels. And we're actually going to talk about how to read food labels. So we're going to look at what a food label looks like and what to aim for. But to start with, you want to think about using less salt in your cooking. So we know that fresh is best. So the more you can cook at home, the more control you have over how much sodium you're actually going to use. So when you cook at home, you want to start to use less salt. You can even get rid of it altogether. I'm going to be honest, it might be tricky in the beginning. So if you're used to adding salt in your cooking or at the table, when you eliminate it, it's going to taste a bit bland in the beginning, but stick with it. It's going to get better. It can take up to 3 months for your taste buds to adapt to that lower sodium taste. So if you're in the beginning of these changes, don't panic. It's going to get better. You're going to stop missing salt eventually, but it can take some time. So that's the very first thing that you can do that's pretty easy is to stop using salt in your cooking and stop adding it at the table. But the most important thing is really to read food labels. So thinking about choosing foods that have less sodium. So if you look at a food label and all the food labels in Canada are going to look the same, the most important things for you folks to look at is the sodium. And you want to aim for that sodium to be less than 250 milligrams or less than 10%. And you don't have to add up every milligram of sodium you need in a day, but if you're at the grocery store buying foods, if you aim to try and have most things be less than 250 milligrams or less than 10%, you're probably doing pretty well when it comes to sodium overall. So let's talk about each one of these food groups and some of these things that you can keep in mind when you're buying these things when it comes to sodium. So grains are things like breads and cereals and pastas. And when you're buying these, if you're buying plain food, so if you're buying plain rice or plain pasta, then the food label is not that important because it's already going to be low in sodium. But when you're buying things like breads or cereals, that's when you want to read the food label. Look for things that have less than 10% before you buy them and bring them home. One of the things you want to be really careful about when it comes to grains is those things like pastas with sauces or rice mixes that have a spice mix inside of them. Those things are often very high in salt. So as much as you can, buy plain rice or plain pasta or plain quinoa, and then add your own flavors or your own marinades or your own sauces, because then you control how much sodium is actually being added. But all those plain grains are absolutely low sodium choices that you can continue to include. When it comes to vegetables and fruit are also low in sodium. So you don't have to worry about these. You can be really generous with vegetables and fruit. You can choose whichever ones you like, and you can add them to your recipes. You can have them as side dishes, as snacks. They're great options. If you buy frozen vegetables and fruit, nutritionally, those are the same as fresh. So those are a great choice. If you are buying frozen vegetables or fruit that have a sauce on it, that's where you have to be careful, because there's probably going to be some sneaky salt added in there. So buy them plain, and then it's great. If you're buying canned vegetables, then you want to make sure you're buying the no salt added canned vegetables. That's what you're aiming for. And then those are quite good as well. But fresh or frozen vegetables and fruit, great choices. When it comes to dairy, so your milk, yogurts, all of those things are fine. Cheeses, though, can be pretty high in sodium. So you want to be a little bit mindful about how much cheese you eat. Usually sort of an ounce a day is a good place to land. And be careful with any kind of processed cheeses. So cream cheese, Cheese Whiz, those cheeses you want to have less often because they tend to be much higher in sodium. But there are things like ricotta or bocconcini. Those cheeses are much lower. So you can also read food labels, but generally speaking, when it comes to cheese, you just want to be a bit careful about how much of those cheeses that you're eating. And then there's our protein group. So this is things like fish, chicken, beef, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, tofu. All of these are great low sodium options, especially if you buy them fresh. So where you have to be a bit careful is if you're buying a meat or a chicken or a fish that's already marinated, because that marinade might contain a lot of sodium. But you can make your own marinades at home that don't have any sodium in them, or you don't add any salt. You can even do really simple things like, if you're doing chicken, put some oregano on top. If you're doing fish, put a bit of dill on top. If you're doing pork, put some rosemary on top. So there's lots of ways that you can add flavors without necessarily adding salt. If you are buying canned beans or canned lentils, look for the no salt added canned beans and canned lentils. Or of course you can make them from dried if that's something that works in your life. But generally you want to buy them in their plainest form, and then you can add the flavor, which is a beautiful segue to my next slide, which is all about adding taste. Because if you're used to using salts, like we talked about in the beginning, you're going to find this to be a tough transition. So you want to find other ways to add flavor. So you can use any herbs and spices that you like. You can use vinegars, lemon juice, lime juice. These are all great ways of adding flavor without adding salt. And again, don't get discouraged. It's going to get better. The longer you eat less salt, the better you're going to like it. And now I want to shift a little bit into talking about fluids. So for some of you, you might have been told by your doctor to be on a fluid restriction. So you could check with your doctor to see what your fluid restriction is. And then you want to track that fluid if you are on a fluid restriction. And anything that's a liquid at room temperature will count towards your fluids. So make sure you check with your doctor to find out what your guidelines are for fluids. When it comes to alcohol, usually the Heart Institute recommends that you don't drink alcohol. If you are going to drink alcohol, not more than 1 drink per day. And always double check with your doctor, because for some of you, drinking alcohol might not be recommended at all. So we talked a bit about this in the beginning, but one of the best things that you can do to help reduce the amount of salt you're eating is to do more cooking at home. And the more you prepare your own food at home, the more you know what's going into the food that you're eating. You also want to try and sit at the table if you can. I know this is easy to say and hard to do, but try to sit at the table, enjoy the food that you're eating, savor it, try to get in touch with your own feelings of hunger and fullness, and really listen to your body. So listen to, are you feeling hunger or are you feeling full? The only exception to this is if you find that your appetite isn't very good, then you really want to try and encourage yourself to eat, because we don't want you to lose too much weight too quickly or to end up getting malnourished. And we're going to talk more about what to do if your appetite isn't very good in our second video. So if you haven't had enough of me after this video, there's 2 videos that you can watch, and our next one talks a bit more about what to do if your appetite isn't very good. You also want to think about eating at regular times, and this can be helpful for you if you find that you're struggling with really trying to recognize your feelings of fullness and your feelings of hunger. Having those regular meal times can help you to get in touch with those cues. And for those of you whose appetite isn't very good, it can also be a reminder that it's important to eat those meals, and they're going to help to keep you healthy. You may also need to plan snacks, so having some snacks available if you get hungry, or perhaps you might find that having something in between meals helps you from getting over hungry. So having some snacks available can be really helpful, and those snacks can be really simple. It can be something as easy as a piece of fruit and a few nuts, or it could be some hummus and carrots. There's lots of great ideas for snacks, and we have many of those ideas on our website if that's something that you are wanting more information on. And of course, there's this healthy plate that I know many of you have probably seen before, but this is a really great thing to think about when you think about your meals. So you always want to think about having half your plate be your vegetables or fruit, a quarter of your plate be your protein foods, which is things like chicken and fish and lentils and tofu and eggs, and a quarter of your plate being your grains. So that's, potatoes, rice, pasta, all of those kinds of foods. So if you kind of keep that in the back of your mind, it's a good place to start when it comes to meals. And I just want to sort of end or remind you that sometimes when you have heart failure, you might find that your appetite isn't as good as it used to be. So if that's the case, stay tuned for the next video, but a couple of tips in case you don't make it to the next video is that you want to think about eating regular meals. You want to think about encouraging yourself to eat, set timers, have snacks, maybe have smaller meals more often. So that is it for me and our first video together. We have a second video that you can check out where we talk about meal planning as well as discussing what to do if your appetite isn't very good. But hopefully this gets you started when it comes to sodium and fluid. And if you have any more questions or you need more information, you can always visit our website, ottawaheart.ca. Thanks very much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.